I am in Branch 8, which is in Walnut Creek. Uh, I'm the Assistant Membership Secretary, which means I'm the gopher for the Membership Secretary. Uh, I've been in the branch about 4 or 5 years. Uh, I head up a couple of activities, one of them being the podcast activity that I'm going to talk about here. I'm an IT guy. I trained computers and was very successful at that. And now I train some computers for some nonprofits, but not nearly as much as I used to. And a podcast are something that came up new for me. And that's probably all you want to know about me. You probably came here to hear about podcasts. Kent, can you put up the first slide? First, I want to clarify what the podcast activity I'm talking about is, because it could be more than one thing, but this is what I mean. Uh, it's it's an activity where you listen to designated podcasts. Basically, we decide what podcast we're going to listen to, and then we get together, we listen to it, and the first part of our activity and the second part is decide what we're going to do next time. It's a lot like a book club. I kind of call it a book club for those with short attention spans, because podcasts are shorter than reading a book. What it's not about, which it could be a separate activity, is teaching people how to create a podcast. Uh, and that's just like creating a radio show, a TV show, all of those kinds of things. There's all the different aspects. I'm not qualified, and that's not what I'll talk about. But just listening and deciding what to listen to. So next slide, please. The first meeting is a big deal and was a big surprise for me that over half the people who came to that Zoom meeting had never listened to a podcast, and they needed the most basic information because they didn't have any idea how to get to a podcast or how to listen to it or how to find them. So most of the time at that meeting was spent training the people that hadn't ever done anything. And one of the points about that, I thought, I kind of anticipated there'd be some training. There was more than I expected, but a podcast player, you can find a podcast just by doing a Google search, but then you get all kinds of other things when you do a Google search and you have to figure out what's a podcast. There's things called podcast players. There's lots of them. They're free. At least all the ones I know about are free. And what they do is you go into them and you can search for you do a search on a podcast player, and the only thing that comes back in your search are podcasts that meet your criteria. Makes it much easier to find something you're looking for. So podcast players were relevant. Some of the people that have been listening to podcasts didn't know about such things. They were glad to hear about it. I didn't even talk about how you can also, when you have a podcast player and you find a series of podcasts you like, they're usually something you can subscribe to, and then you can find the ones on it even easier. So next slide, please. That's the first meeting. And what I found since then is choosing what podcast to listen to is really crucial for the group. And it's like a book club also. When the group starts, we don't know what we're going to be interested in. One person's got one set of interests, and podcasts can be most anything, like books, all kinds of varieties. So I started with what I thought were some general interest podcasts. And then I've been working at trying to find out what the interest of the people who are coming to the activity are. And then we select future podcasts by kind of rotating amongst the group, somebody who's willing to say, I'll select a podcast for next time, and we'll have them. That works for some people. Some people don't want to do that. And I don't think they should be forced to. some people react to that like it's homework. We don't want to have homework. We did away with that a long time ago, since we were in grammar school, I guess, or high school. So you need to come up with a way to have varied podcasts and not drive people away, which mostly that's by talking to them. So there you have it. That's all there is to a podcast activity. Get your basics going, then figure out what people want to listen to, and then you get together. And we decided twice a month was the right frequency for this group to get together, have a Zoom meeting, talk about some podcasts, select some podcasts. Every couple of weeks, basically, we do that. And that's all the more that I had in terms of prepared comments. That's what it's about. So questions, anybody have any? I hope.
Yes, Rich, go ahead.
Norm Steinbach, 102. Are these podcasts live or are they on demand?
They're pre-recorded. The podcast, that's what the podcast player is for. It's similar to something like on demand, but they're just a set of files out on the internet. A podcast site is a place where there's podcasts. They're not live. You can. The podcasts are never live, but they do get published with regularity. Like some series, they might publish 2 podcasts per week. And so there are certain days they drop the podcast, but that doesn't mean that they're live. They're pre-recorded and they make them available to the public at a certain time. So podcasts are always pre-recorded, and so they're not interactive. Most of the ones that I listen to, it seems like at the end, they have what they call listener mail, which are emails that people send to them, and they talk about those. But usually those are from some podcast that was a week or 2 or a month before.
How do you avoid politics?
You don't. Actually, politics are very interesting podcasts. And then, you listen to the podcast and people say one thing, you need to make sure that there's room for everybody's different points of view, because we all know that we're not all the same. Like the podcast that we're doing next week is actually a series about Spiro Agnew. Now, people are going to have very different points of view about that.
The Bagman.
Yes, exactly. That series.
I've seen that series. That's a great series.
Yeah, I just finished listening to it day before yesterday, I think. I had never heard of it before, but one of the other people in the group came up with that as the one they wanted to do. And so I listened to the whole series. That's a bit more, that series, 7 episodes in total, it's about 5 or 6 hours. That's more than we usually do. Usually the podcasts that we select take about 2 hours to listen to. And we have about 2 weeks in between meetings. So,
Rich, looking at podcasts myself, we listen to a couple of them, but like they have a continuing series. Let's say, they got 182 episodes, but it's basically the same subject. Would you just take one episode and then discuss it, or would you say run 5 or 6 of them? Because you were just talking about a series of 7 there.
Okay, and what we've done, the first time we did it, I picked one episode that I thought was interesting, the very first one. So if we had something to one episode from a series that was like that. And then last time we met, the person that did that picked 2 episodes out of another series that had like 80 or 90. So it varies. It's what we're doing, each person who's going to select the podcast for the next 2 weeks, they have complete control over how much they want to suggest. And it just turned out the person who suggested Bagman thought we should do the whole series. I don't know what kind of pushback we're going to get at that. That might be too much for some of the people.
So you don't really take podcasts or like running current events. You take them that are contained within a subject The subject is contained within the podcast. You don't, it's not open-ended, right? I mean, it's not like a podcast that always continues on, you know?
No, it's not an ongoing series. We haven't done the ongoing series.
Okay.
That's not one of the choices we've made. But I think twice we've done actually 2 podcasts, and one was almost about medical stuff, and one was BBC almost psychoanalysis. It was like one of them, the podcast was about why is land ownership so important to civilization, as an example. And it covered a part of that. That's a big subject, but it turns out the podcast only covers one part. So I'm hesitant to say yes or no, because we could do a series, but most of the ones that I know about that have like 180 episodes, they are not sequential episodes. Like an example, one that has that many is something called Stuff You Missed in History Class. And it's just a different episode about something historical. Sometimes they'll do 2 episodes, but usually it's just one about something in history. And it's not by any sequence in time. And they drop them 3 times a week. So I don't know how many, there's at least 180 that they've got up now. They've been doing it for a long time. And I think the BBC one, it has about 80 episodes now, but those are not a series. One of the ones I was thinking about starting, there is this one that's like a soap opera. It's called Tumande. It's got 2 seasons so far. It might have a 3rd season up, but it is every week it gets dropped, and it is a continuing story. I'm thinking
Like
I
a
might,
soap opera.
yeah, I always think that I might, for this podcast activity, do like the first episode or first 2 episodes, and then if people are interested on their own, they can listen to the rest. And another person requested something about sports, and I'm going to try to figure out what kind of a podcast can I do about sports. I don't know about that, but I haven't searched yet either. But it's picking things that are going to be of interest and have variety. I mean, one of the reasons I like to do things like podcast or a book club is to get exposed to things that I don't normally see. I kind of get into a pattern of what kind of books I read or what kind of podcasts I listen to. By getting other people's suggestions, I get exposed to something else, and sometimes it's really good.
Lou, you're up next.
Oh, I have a question. All right. I was reading in the paper this morning that Apple is going to start charging for podcasts. Have you heard anything about that?
I haven't. I read that this morning too, and I said, "Oh no."
Yeah.
I don't think that that's gonna take over the world very quickly, because stuff on the internet that costs was free. I
I
don't
think
think
they
that works.
said that it would allow the person that's submitting the podcast to charge. They're not going to charge you, but, so it's really, if someone's doing a podcast and they think it's worth money, then they're going to try to charge you for it.
Oh, okay. Well, there's some that do that now. I think Preet and some others. Anyway, yeah. Okay.
I'm more interested that they're going to start allowing you to opt out of tracking your movement.
Oh, I'm sure they probably already do.
They're putting on
Yeah.
the iPad. I'm on an iPad. We talk keyboards, doesn't work.
Oh, yeah. I think they probably do. And Facebook, I'm sure, is the one that's tracking.
They don't. Yeah. Well, this is supposed to be sort of an anti-Facebook thing.
Yeah.
We'll see how it works.
Apple tends to be the
One
company
thing in case people don't know it, podcasts do have advertising most times. And one of the things you can pay for are certain services that will put the same podcast up without the advertising.
Oh, okay.
You have to pay like $10 a month for that. One of those, something called Wondery. They have something called Wondery Plus, and it removes the advertising of their podcasts.
Apple is
I haven't tried.
Apple is one of the companies that tracks you less than anybody else.
Right.
I can't guarantee all the time, but I have a friend who keeps track of that, and he keeps trying to tell me that they're the best company to work with as far as not being tracked.
And yet they're the ones that have the best, where's my iPhone type app.
Rich, this is Ron Irwin from 149. How many people do you have in your podcast group that listens in on? Do you do this on Zoom?
Yes, we do it on Zoom. We get around 10 people. It's been as high as I think 18 and as low as 8. But I think 10 or 12 usually is what we get. We've only done it, I think 4 or 5 times is all. So this is a relatively new thing for us too.
Another
Somebody just
question.
volunteered me to talk on this. I said, okay.
All right. And all of the podcasts you listen to are free. You don't have to subscribe to anything.
Well, that's something that is important to understand. Subscribing on podcasts does not mean you're going to pay for something. I subscribe to probably a dozen different series. I don't pay a penny for any of them. That just means as soon as they drop a new episode, like Stuff You Missed in History is an example of one. Every time a new podcast from Stuff You Missed in History is made public, I automatically get it on my list of podcasts under that icon. By subscribing, I get an icon for that particular set of podcasts, and I click once on it and see a list of all their podcasts. Doesn't cost me any money. Subscribing just means you get notification that they've dropped something.
Sounds good. What my question, sorry, my question next is, do we all listen to it separately or all together?
Separately. Everybody, and the way that we do it, everybody listens on their own time whenever they want to, and then we get together and talk about it. It's very, very much like a book club in that regard. You know, you don't read the book together. Everybody reads it, and then you get together and talk about it.
Thank you.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great.
Who?
Yeah, yes, I don't have a camera, and I just found out I have a microphone. The question I have is, I subscribed to a podcast app last year, and it's coming up for renewal. I'm wondering, listening to you, I don't need to have that. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know what that particular thing is that you get for that subscription. And it sounds like it's a subscription that costs you something.
$15.
Well, if you want to get lots of podcasts and don't want to pay for it, that's readily available.
And that's on the podcast player you're talking about?
Yes, basically, if you go into a podcast player, the way I'm familiar with several of them, not real familiar, but familiar enough, you can go in and look for podcasts. And once you select a podcast, often a little thing will come up and it'll ask you if you want to subscribe. And if you click the subscribe button, then you'll see whether or not it's something that I've never had one that was going to cost me something. All that did was give me an icon then. And the one that the podcast I was looking at right now was part of a list. Also, somebody has told me about a particular series, like Bagman is an example. I did a search on my podcast player for Bagman. Boom, I subscribed to it, got the whole series. Didn't cost me anything.
I see. Part of the problem I have with the podcast that I download to my iPhone, I connect it to my Ford app when I'm driving, and listening to some of these podcasts, I have to have a signal.
You have to have a what?
A signal. In other words, if I get in the mountains, I don't have a signal. I can't get the podcast, even though I downloaded it to my iPhone.
Okay.
That doesn't make
usually-
sense. If you download to your iPhone, then you don't need to have a signal.
Yes, if you
Well,
download
that's-
something, you need to download it when you have the signal, and then you can play it when you don't have a signal. But you've got to
Yeah,
download first.
I thought that's what it should be, but it doesn't work that way for some reason. It
Well-
cuts out and comes back in again.
Well, you have a choice, when you're looking at a podcast, usually there's a down arrow that says download and then a horizontal arrow that will just play it. And if you just play it, it doesn't download it. You
It's,
gotta
yeah,
first
it's,
download.
it's when he just plays it, it's streaming from the source and you need
Yeah.
the internet then. But if you download it while you're near a good internet connection, it can be stored in the memory of your device. And then you play it back from the device through the speakers in your car and
That
you'll be
was-
fine.
That was my impression, and I'll look at it. I'm pretty sure I downloaded it instead of just playing it, but I'll look at the issue again. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Sounds like most of you know a little something about podcasts at least. So you're more knowledgeable than most of my group of participants in my activity. But you need to have at least one person that knows something about podcasts.
I run twice a month. It's a kind of a technology computer group. And we use something like Zoom, but it isn't Zoom to do that. So anybody interested in joining that, I can give them instructions or put them on the list of email reminders.
Sounds good to me.
You like that, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, well, why don't you
Put the contact information in the chat box?
Oh, what a great idea. I didn't even think of it. I'll do that. Okay.
So anybody that wants to contact Bob about this, if you look in the chat box, he's about to put the necessary contact information.
Whoops, let me turn off the clicking sounds.
It makes us feel like you're really doing something. So what is it you're putting together now? A group to do what?
It's a computer club. It's been meeting for, well, after every normal SIR meeting, we've been meeting for years. And then I have a separate computer club that meets in my town that I lead. And so we just combined the two and are doing it now online. But I would warn you especially that we are bigots for Linux and hate Apple. And we use the expression for Apple people, a fool and their money is soon parted.
Yeah, I have a lot of friends that are Linux.
Okay,
kids.
yeah,
Been around them a long time.
yes.
Yes, it's so sad. Those Linux people are living in the past.
Uh-oh.
That's okay. I'll take that.
I can swap my hard drives and you can disappear too. I have Linux on one and Microsoft on another.
Oh, well, that's great. And then you can choose
Well,
which one you want when you boot.
Right.
Yep, we do that all the time. Good, good. Oh, we'd love to have you. Well, let me finish this chat. If I can find where I was typing again. Okay.
Okay, meanwhile, are there any other questions about podcast. I think we've covered them.
Um, Let's see.
Anybody have some favorite things that they subscribe to? Or does anybody listen to any sports podcasts? I don't know what that would be even.
You know, one thing I was thinking about when you mentioned sports, you could be looking up sports histories. You know, I pick a team and then find a podcast on the history of that team and see if there's any funny, you know, stories that go along with a certain team.
Yeah,
Sa-
that's something like.
The San Francisco Giants just started a podcast with Glenn Kuiper, or not Glenn, Kuiper, you know, the announcer for the Giants, his son, and the guy that writes for the, I think he's a sports writer. They have a podcast, and I think they've had two episodes so far. And I listened to the first one. It was kind of fun. And if you look on search for on the Apple anyway, if you look for just put in San Francisco Giants and it might come up.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good idea. Thanks.
Mhm.
That'll be different. I'm more of a basketball person.
Well, the Warriors have a podcast too.
I like the way the Warriors play. They're fun to watch.
Yeah, unbelievable.
I used to play basketball.
The two I found for the San Francisco Giants, one is called Giants Talk, and the other one's Giants Splash. And the Chronicle runs the Splash one, and Alex Polvik
Right.
and Cole, somebody does Giants Talk.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, that's the other guy is Kuiper's son,
mhm.
Glenn.
Okay. Well, you guys have helped me then. I already know a couple things to look for to meet that need that one of the newbies to podcast expressed. I think he's a Giant fan.
Well, this has
Okay.
been very interesting. Thank you very much.